My name is Lila Foster. I'm 23 years old, and for most of my life, I've tried not to be a burden. I tried to smile when I was invisible, tried to stay quiet when I wanted to scream, tried to fit into a family that never once made room for me. But nothing could have prepared me for that Christmas night, when my grandfather asked me a question so simple, so innocent, and yet it shattered the last piece of me I had been trying to hold together. "Lila, do you like your new house?" I froze. The question came so casually, as if it made perfect sense. We were all gathered in the grand dining room of my father's new home, the table set with polished silverware and glistening wine glasses. Holiday candles flickered against the red and gold decorations. There were trays of roast duck, glazed ham, and fresh rolls still steaming from the oven. It looked like a scene out of a holiday movie. And I was standing there, in my faded black coat, gripping a cheap bottle of wine and a handmade scarf I had spent 3 weeks crocheting after long shifts at the supermarket. I forced a small smile. "It's beautiful, Grandpa," I said, the words catching in my throat. But the smile didn't reach my eyes, because it wasn't my house. It was theirs, my father's, his wife Meredith's, and their golden boy, Evan, the son who got everything, the son who was cherished, protected, celebrated, the son who lived in the house that was meant for me. I didn't know yet what would unfold in the next few minutes. I didn't know that my silence, my refusal to lie, would unravel a secret my family had been hiding for 2 years. But I could feel it coming. It started with the way Grandpa's joyful face faltered. His eyes flicked from me to my father, then to Meredith, sitting prim and polished at the end of the table in a crimson silk dress. There was a pause, a heavy, smothering pause that made the room suddenly too quiet. I could hear the fireplace crackling in the background. I could hear the clink of a spoon on a dessert plate. But mostly, I could hear my own heartbeat, loud and frantic in my ears. My father, Richard, coughed lightly, gripping the stem of his wine glass. His hand trembled ever so slightly. Meredith was the first to speak. "Oh, Will, there must be a little misunderstanding," she said sweetly, her smile tight. "This is the family's house. We all enjoy it, especially Lila. Isn't that right, sweetheart?" She turned to me with the same smile she'd always worn, the one that never quite touched her eyes. I opened my mouth, but nothing came out. Because I realized something in that moment, something that made my knees nearly buckle. They were lying to him. To the only person in the world who had ever shown me unconditional love, my grandfather, Will Foster, a self-made man who built a construction empire from the ground up, a man who traveled back and forth between Chicago and Ohio his whole life, but always found time to call me on my birthdays, the only man who had ever looked at me like I mattered. And now he was being used, manipulated, used as a prop in the fantasy my father had built, a fantasy that painted us as one big happy family living together in this beautiful house. Except I didn't live here. I had never even slept here. I still lived in a crumbling apartment on the south side of town, one that smelled of damp wood and leaked every time it rained. I worked night shifts 6 days a week just to afford instant noodles and rent. I didn't have health insurance. I didn't even own a proper bed, just a cot and some blankets I bought secondhand. But here I was, being pulled into the family photo album like some long-lost daughter of privilege. And Grandpa, he believed it. He thought this was my home. I looked at him again. His kind eyes were narrowing now, flickering with something between confusion and hurt. "This is your house," he said softly, more to himself than anyone. "I bought this for you." My heart stopped. I stared at him. What did you say? I gave your father the money. For you. A gift. I told him to use it to get you started. I wanted you to have something of your own. My mouth went dry. I felt the floor tilt beneath me. I looked at my father, but he refused to meet my gaze. Meredith's eyes were wide now, but her mouth remained frozen in that fake, polite smile. Grandpa, I don't live here, I said. My voice was quiet, but each word came out like a blade. His face turned pale. What do you mean you don't live here? I have a rented apartment. I pay for it myself. I work nights at a grocery store, Grandpa. I've never lived in this house. Not a single day. Silence. Not just the silence of a room going quiet, but the kind that drowns everything, like a wave crashing down on you, like a moment where time stops. Richard finally stood up. Dad, you don't understand. Lila wanted to be independent. She didn't want to live here. That's a lie, I snapped. Everyone turned to me. Tears burned behind my eyes, but I didn't let them fall. None of you ever offered. You never even told me this house existed until last month. And even then, it was for a small party, not a welcome home. You've been parading me around in your photos to pretend I was part of this. But I've never belonged here. Grandpa's shoulders were stiff now, his jaw clenched. I gave you that money, he said to my father. I made it very clear it was for Lila, not for you, not for your wife, not for Evan, for her. Richard stammered. Dad, we just thought Evan needs the space. He's starting college soon. And Lila, she's always been so independent. She never asked for anything. I never asked, I whispered, because I knew the answer was always no. My voice cracked. I spent years wondering what I did wrong, why I wasn't good enough. I thought maybe if I stayed out of the way, didn't cause trouble, worked hard, maybe one day you'd see me. Maybe one day you'd say you were proud of me. Grandpa's eyes were glassy now, but his voice was steel. Get your things, Lila, he said, turning to me. You're coming to Chicago. This house, I'll fix that. It was never meant for them. My father stood still, mouth agape. Meredith muttered something about misunderstandings, but Grandpa wasn't listening anymore. Neither was I, because for the first time in years, someone was standing for me, not just silently loving me from a distance, but claiming me, defending me, and pulling me out of the shadows I had been forced to live in. That night, as I packed the few belongings I had from my apartment, my journals, my books, my scarf hooks, I realized something. They thought I was just a burden, a shadow, a piece of leftover grief from a mother long gone. But they were wrong, and they were about to learn just how wrong they had been. People say you don't remember your early childhood clearly, but I do. Not every detail, but the feeling of it, the heaviness in the air, the coldness of rooms I lived in, the way my name was said, always sharp, like I'd done something wrong even when I hadn't spoken a word. I was 5 when Meredith came into our lives. She was beautiful, her nails always painted, her clothes perfectly pressed, her smile wide and practiced. My father, Richard, looked at her like she was the prize he deserved after surviving the loss of my mother. My mother, Elise Foster, died during childbirth. I've only seen her in pictures. Soft hair, eyes like mine. The kind of woman who looked like she would sing to her baby before bed, who would know how to braid hair and bake cookies from scratch. I never got to know her, but I missed her every day. Meredith moved in quickly. She rearranged the furniture, changed the curtains, and slowly erased all signs of my mother. Every framed photo, every item that carried the scent of the past vanished. And then came Evan, the son they always wanted. He was born when I was 6. I remember sitting on the edge of my bed the night they brought him home from the hospital. Meredith didn't look at me as she passed down the hall, cradling Evan in her arms like he was royalty. My father followed behind, eyes only for his new family. No one told me to come meet my baby brother. No one asked if I was okay. No one explained why I suddenly had to share everything except love, because that, it seemed, I never got to share at all. From then on, Evan became the sun around which the family orbited. And I was the thing floating outside the system, always there, but never glowing, never warm. I remember birthdays where Evan got bikes and chocolate cakes and parties with balloons. On my birthday, store-bought cupcakes and a nod from my father if I was lucky. Once when I turned 10, I asked if I could invite a few girls from school for a small sleepover. Meredith laughed and said, "Honey, we can't afford that kind of mess. Be grateful we're letting you stay here." Letting me stay. As if I didn't belong. My room was the attic, a space so small I had to duck under the beams to walk across it. In winter, it was freezing. In summer, it was suffocating. There was a single window, always dirty, that overlooked the back alley. Meanwhile, Evan's room was downstairs, spacious, colorful, covered in posters of astronauts and race cars. When I asked why he got a better room, Meredith said, "Because he's still growing. He needs proper light. You're already tall enough." I was 11. I think that was the first time I truly understood I wasn't wanted. But I didn't scream, didn't cry. Instead, I began folding myself inward, like a piece of paper, creased again and again until I barely took up space. I did the dishes, I swept the floors, I cooked dinner when Meredith claimed her migraines were too strong to lift a spoon. No one ever thanked me. I got good at school, top of my class by 8th grade. I thought maybe, just maybe, that would earn something. When I brought home my straight-A report card, my father skimmed it, handed it back, and said, "You should focus less on school and more on learning some practical skills. You're not going to college anytime soon." Evan, on the other hand, got a celebration dinner for passing his math class with a D. They took pictures. They posted it on Facebook. My name wasn't even mentioned. Looking back, I think I held on because of Grandpa Will. He didn't live near us. He was in Chicago, busy with his company. But every few months he'd call me, just me. His voice always made me feel like I existed. "How's my girl?" he'd ask. "Still reading all those books? Still drawing?" He remembered things. My favorite author, that I loved sketching birds, that I wanted to become an architect someday, though I'd barely whispered that dream out loud to anyone else. And when he visited once every year or two, he brought small, thoughtful gifts, books, pencils, little carved figurines. I kept them all in a box under my bed like treasure. Those were the moments that kept me going. He never said it outright, but I could feel it. He knew I was being left behind, that I was surviving on scraps of affection. But I never told him everything. I didn't want to make him choose. I didn't want him to see just how unloved I was. And yet, somehow, he still saw enough to try and fix it. Just not in time. Not before they took what was meant for me. Not before they claimed a house that never belonged to them and smiled as if they were proud owners of the life they stole. And all I could think of, standing in that dining room at 23 years old, was this. If this was the life I had been denied, then what could I have become If someone had just told me I mattered. Evan had always been the center of the household, but it wasn't just love and attention they poured into him. It was investment. It was faith. It was the unshakable belief that he would carry the family name with pride, while I, Lila, was just someone they had to deal with. I remember the exact moment that realization cemented itself in me. I was 14. We had both auditioned for a school talent show, Evan with a guitar he barely knew how to tune, and me with a sketched storyboard I'd worked on for weeks. A short animation I created frame by frame with an old cracked tablet a neighbor had given me. I made the cut. He didn't. At dinner that evening, Meredith didn't even acknowledge my name on the finalist list. Instead, she said loudly over roasted chicken, "It's okay, sweetie. Those judges don't know real talent when they see it." She looked at Evan with pride while scooping more potatoes onto his plate. I looked down at mine, bare, except for some leftover vegetables. Then she added with a smirk, "Art isn't exactly a real skill anyway." I was sitting right there. She wasn't even trying to hide it anymore. I stopped mentioning my wins after that, the science fair awards, the scholarship recommendations. Even when my drawing was selected to represent our school district in a regional gallery, I never brought it up. Because what was the point? No matter what I did, Evan's mediocrity was worth more than my excellence. When he failed algebra and needed a tutor, they hired a private one, $50 an hour. When I aced the same class with no help, I got told, "Don't get cocky, Lila." When Evan crashed his bike and got a scrape, Meredith wailed like he'd lost a limb, fussed over him for days, bought him a new helmet and a better bike. When I sprained my wrist after falling down the stairs I was mopping, by the way, I got a bottle of ibuprofen tossed my way and a sarcastic, "You should be more careful." That was life. That was normal in our house. And still, I tried. I don't even know why. Maybe because I still had some foolish hope buried deep inside me. Hope that if I kept working harder, kept being good, someone might finally turn their head and see me. But the more I tried to shine, the more they dimmed the lights around me. The attic room I slept in was a reminder every night. My clothes were mostly thrift store finds, passed down from Meredith's old boxes or hand-me-downs from some neighbor's daughter. Meanwhile, Evan got new clothes every school year, his own laptop, even a part-time car when he turned 16. I had to beg just to borrow the family computer for school projects, and even then, Meredith would watch me like a hawk, claiming I was using up electricity like we lived in a hotel. I wasn't allowed to lock my door. Evan was. I wasn't allowed to invite friends over. Evan's friends basically lived at our place every weekend. Once, when I was 16, I got a job offer to help out part-time at a local bookstore. It felt like heaven. Books everywhere. Quiet. Kindness. But when I told my father, he shook his head. "You don't need a job, Lila. Focus on chores, and don't come home thinking you're grown just because someone handed you a paycheck." Evan started working at a pizza joint the following summer. Suddenly, working was independent, mature, admirable. They bragged about it to everyone. I wanted to scream, but I didn't. I swallowed it. I kept doing what they asked, because every once in a while Grandpa would call, and I'd feel like I existed again. Those phone calls were sacred. "How's school, sweetheart?" "Still drawing? Still thinking about architecture?" I'd always smile through the pain and say, "Yeah, Grandpa, I'm trying." And he'd say, "That's my girl." Just those 3 words. That's my girl. They were worth more to me than any birthday present. Because when you grow up feeling like a ghost in your own home, even the tiniest bit of recognition feels like sunlight after years in the dark. He always told me he was proud of me, and I believed him, even if no one else ever said it. But I didn't tell him the truth. I never told him about the attic, the way Meredith would ask Evan what he wanted for dinner and toss a microwave meal my way. I never told him about the time they forgot my birthday entirely, and when I reminded them, Meredith said, "You're too old for parties now anyway." Or the time Evan broke my sketchbook, tearing pages out to draw funny faces on top of my architectural designs, and they laughed like it was a harmless prank. Or how once, after I got accepted into a free summer design program, my father sat me down and said, "Lila, I think you should stay home this summer. Help out with your brother. It'll be good for the family." I nodded, but inside, something died, something collapsed, something I didn't even have a name for yet. What do you call the feeling of being raised in a house where you're always the afterthought? What do you call the grief of being alive but never really seen? It wasn't that I hated Evan. He wasn't cruel. He was just complicit. He saw how they treated me. He never once spoke up. That, too, became part of the favoritism file, not just what they did, but what they let happen in silence. So when Grandpa said, "This house, it was meant for you," everything inside me cracked, because for once, someone had believed I was worth building a home around, and they had stolen it. Not just the house, but every chance I had to feel like I belonged. I don't remember when I stopped expecting love from them. Maybe it was the day they told me I wouldn't be going to college. Or maybe it was much earlier, when I stood outside Evan's birthday party holding a gift I'd saved up for, only to be told it was a family-only event and to please stay upstairs until the guests left. I just remember something inside me going still, cold, like a switch had been flipped. And I realized I was never going to be chosen in that house. So I started choosing myself. It began with small things, secret victories, like staying late at the school library to read design magazines and teach myself architectural software using outdated school computers, or sketching blueprints late into the night while lying on my creaky attic bed, using a flashlight because I wasn't allowed to keep the lights on after 10 p.m. Then came the job at the supermarket. I lied about my age at first, said I was 17 when I was only 16, just to get them to let me bag groceries. I worked weekends and weeknights, slipping in and out of the house without anyone noticing. They never asked where I was going. They didn't care. And that was the gift, because when no one's watching, no one can stop you. The store became my first taste of freedom. I stocked shelves, cleaned spills, carried heavy boxes in the back storage room. It wasn't glamorous. It wasn't easy. But it gave me something I'd never had before. My own money. It was barely anything, but it was mine. The first thing I bought was a real drawing pad and a set of pens. The second was a warm jacket from the clearance bin, one that actually fit me. And with each dollar saved, I began building something in my mind. Not a house, not yet, but a door. A door I could one day walk through and never come back. I started keeping a secret notebook under my mattress. Pages filled with project ideas, apartment listings, college programs I could maybe apply to if I got lucky, scholarships that didn't require family tax records. Every chance I got, I researched online, at the library, on my cracked phone while waiting for the bus. I became obsessed with escape, with survival. My grades stayed high, but no one noticed. No one asked why I skipped dinner most nights or why I stopped leaving notes about where I was. At 17, I applied to 2 community colleges in Chicago, one with a small architecture certificate program. I didn't tell anyone. When I got accepted into one, I didn't celebrate. I cried in a bathroom stall at work, knees pulled up to my chest, the email glowing on my screen like a small flame. But I didn't go. Because when I told my father that I was thinking of leaving, Just thinking. He gave me a cold look and said, "Don't be selfish, Lila. You can't just walk away. We need you here. Evan's getting ready for college, and Meredith's health isn't the best." I remember nodding. I remember saying, "Okay." And then I remember waking up at 3 a.m. that night, lying in the dark attic, staring at the cracked ceiling and promising myself, "You will leave. Maybe not now. But one day, you will." Until then, I would keep playing the part, the obedient daughter, the quiet helper, the extra. But inside, I was sharpening my edges, studying harder, working longer, saving every penny. Sometimes I'd fantasize about walking out the front door with nothing but a backpack, hopping on a bus, and disappearing into the skyline of a city that didn't know my name, where no one knew I was the girl left behind, where I could be someone new, someone whole. But reality had teeth. I didn't have enough money, and I was afraid. Not of being alone, I was already used to that, but of failing, of ending up back in that house, weaker than when I left. So I stayed. I worked more. I lived less. I stopped sketching for fun and started offering design help to classmates. $5 for a logo, 10 for a poster. I designed a few flyers for small local businesses and sold custom bookmarks on Etsy using library Wi-Fi. It was barely enough to cover groceries, but it gave me purpose. Every time I dropped $1 into my secret envelope hidden in the lining of my backpack, it felt like taking one brick off my prison wall. Brick by brick, year by year. By the time I was 20, I had saved enough to rent a tiny studio apartment on the South Side. The ceilings were low, the heater rattled, and the faucet dripped at night like a metronome counting my loneliness. But it was mine, my keys, my light switches, my rules. No one told me when to turn the lights off. No one told me what to eat or what to wear or how long I could stay in the shower. And no one ignored me anymore, because I had finally stepped out of the frame they'd boxed me into. I still worked nights at the supermarket, took online classes during the day, and sketched blueprints during my breaks. I lived off ramen noodles and coffee. But I was free, sort of, because I still carried them inside me. Their silence, their absence, their judgment. And even though I never went back to that house except on forced holidays, they found ways to drag me into their performance, family dinners, photos, holidays where Meredith would send short, cold texts like, 6 p.m. sharp, wear something presentable. Evan has guests. I went. Every time. With a forced smile and a cheap bottle of wine in hand, because no matter how free I thought I was, a part of me still hoped someone would notice. Someone would finally say, "Lila, we were wrong. You deserved better." But no one ever did, and I stopped waiting. Until that night. Until Grandpa showed up. Until he looked at me across the dining table and asked, "Do you like your new house?" And I realized they hadn't just stolen my childhood. They had stolen the very future he tried to give me, and I wasn't going to let that stand. If there's one thread that kept me from unraveling completely, it was him. Grandpa Will, the man with calloused hands and a voice like gravel warmed by sunlight. The kind of man who wore suits that smelled like sawdust and cologne, who spoke little but meant every word, the kind who built things with his hands and with his heart. He didn't raise me, he wasn't around all the time, but somehow he saw me, in a way no one else in that house ever had. The first time I met him, I was 4. I don't remember the words we exchanged, but I remember the way he knelt down to my height, looked me right in the eyes, and handed me a wooden bird he'd carved himself. It was painted blue, wings open in mid-flight. I carried it everywhere until I lost it on a school bus 2 years later, and I cried, not because it was gone, but because it felt like losing the only thing that had ever been mine. From then on, he'd bring me something every time he visited, something small but meaningful. A notebook with pressed pages and gold trim, a miniature compass, a tiny bronze key that he said, "Won't open any doors yet, but one day it might." He never played favorites. He never said a bad word about Meredith or my father, even though I could sometimes see the disappointment in his eyes when they spoke over me at dinner or ignored my answers. Instead, he'd ask me things directly. "Still drawing? What's your latest sketch look like? Got any wild ideas you want to build someday?" I remember showing him one of my early drawings, a clumsy sketch of a treehouse on stilts with solar panels and skylights. I was 11. He didn't laugh, didn't say it was childish. He said, "That's innovation, kid. People who see beyond the ground, they're the ones who lift cities." I carried that sentence like armor. Every time I felt invisible, every time Meredith said, "You should think more realistically, Lila," or my father brushed off my designs as doodles, I clung to those words. People who see beyond the ground. He was the only one who asked about my mother, too. Elise Foster, his daughter, the name no one else ever spoke. He told me she used to sing along to Billie Holiday records and once climbed onto the roof of their Chicago house just to see what the stars looked like without the glare of city lights. "She had your curiosity," he said once, always reaching past what was in front of her. I would sit with him for hours during his visits, soaking up every story. He made her feel real, like more than just a faded photo in a dusty frame, like I hadn't just come into this world through tragedy, but through a line of strength. And still, I never told him the truth about how I was living. I don't know why. Maybe because I didn't want to hurt him. Or maybe because some part of me thought if I spoke it aloud, it would become permanent. Instead, I showed him carefully cropped pieces of my world, a decent school report here, a new drawing there, an occasional text message. "Hey, Grandpa, just thinking of you." Sometimes he'd call me at random, usually late in the evening when he was done at his office. His voice would be tired, but warm. "Just wanted to hear your voice, kiddo." Those calls saved me more times than I can count, even when I had nothing new to share, even when I was too tired to pretend. He never demanded anything from me, never made me feel like I had to earn his time. And when I moved into my tiny apartment, I almost told him. Almost. But I didn't want him to be disappointed. I thought if I worked hard enough, maybe one day I could call him and say, "I made it." Maybe even invite him to visit, show him the life I built with nothing but grit and grit alone. But now I realize he had always seen that fight in me long before I saw it in myself, because when he called me that night, the night everything changed, he said something I'd never forget. "I'm at your house, sweetheart. It's beautiful. You did good." I remember standing still in the aisle of the supermarket, frozen with the phone pressed to my ear. My house? What house? And in that instant, it all unraveled. I knew, deep in my gut, that something was terribly wrong, because if Grandpa believed he was at my house, then someone had lied to him, deliberately, and if someone had lied, then someone had something to hide. I didn't know what yet, but I knew it would hurt. I knew it would crack open everything I'd spent years trying to hold together, and yet I wasn't afraid, because Grandpa was there. He was there. He had come. He was standing in the house I had been shut out of, asking about me, thinking it belonged to me. And for once, I wasn't going to let them rewrite the story. For once, I wasn't going to stay silent. I hung up the phone, told my manager I had an emergency, and ran out into the snowy evening, heart pounding. The cold air stung my cheeks, but I barely felt it. I didn't care how they would react when I showed up. I didn't care what lie they would spin. All I cared about was walking through that door and meeting my grandfather's eyes, not as the discarded daughter in the attic, not as the girl they paraded in photos like a token, but as his girl, the one he believed in, the one he trusted, the one he had unknowingly saved. The snow fell fast that night, each flake caught in the glow of the street lamps, turning the air into a swirling tunnel of frost and silence. I drove with both hands clenched tightly on the wheel, my breath fogging up the inside of the windshield as the heater groaned with effort. My heart raced. The address Meredith had texted me weeks ago flashed in my memory, 1432 Hollow Creek Drive. I had only been there once, a quick stop, just long enough to deliver a bottle of wine, hand over a gift, smile politely, and leave before dessert. It hadn't felt like my place then. Now I knew for certain it was never supposed to be theirs. And yet, here I was, pulling into the polished driveway of a house built with his money, for me, while they hosted guests beneath crystal lights and smiled like saints. I sat in the car for a moment after cutting the engine, watching the warm lights from the windows. Laughter floated through the walls. There were voices, toasts, celebration, and suddenly I felt detached, as if I were watching a movie about someone else's life, someone who didn't know she'd been erased. My fingers trembled as I reached for the scarf I'd crocheted for Grandpa, a deep blue wool, soft to the touch. I hadn't given it to him yet. I was planning to. One day, on a better day. I tucked it into my coat pocket, stepped out into the snow, and walked toward the front door. I didn't knock. I pushed the door open gently and stepped inside. The heat hit me instantly. Warmth, luxury, voices, the sharp scent of red wine and rosemary chicken. It should have felt like coming home. Instead, it felt like stepping into enemy territory. And there he was, Grandpa, standing in the middle of the living room, his silver hair catching the light from the chandelier, his frame still tall, still strong, the same look in his eyes he had always worn when talking about building foundations, serious, steady, certain. He turned when he saw me. His entire face lit up. "Lila, my girl!" And then he did the thing that broke me. He opened his arms. I rushed into them before I could think, before I could cry, before I could speak. He held me tight, whispering into my ear, "I'm proud of you. I was just telling them how lucky you are to have this place." I pulled away. "What did you say?" "This house," he said, gesturing around. "I've been meaning to visit for months. I wanted to see it in person. I knew it'd be perfect for you." The room went silent. Every laugh, every voice, every clink of cutlery faded. All eyes turned to us. I could feel Meredith stare from the corner, sharp, brittle, venomous. My father stood near the fireplace, wineglass in hand, stiff as a statue. Evan sat on the edge of the couch, glancing between us like a child caught watching a movie he didn't understand. I looked at Grandpa. My mouth opened, and I spoke the truth. "I don't live here." He blinked. "What?" "I don't live in this house, Grandpa." I could hear the blood rushing in my ears, but I kept going. "I never have. I rent a studio apartment on the south side. I pay for it with my supermarket wages. This house isn't mine. It was never given to me. They never told me anything about it." The silence deepened. It became almost violent. Meredith was the first to speak. her voice sugary sweet and trembling with panic. "Oh, Will, there's been some confusion, I'm sure. Lila wanted her independence. She's always been like that, right, darling?" I turned to her, stared into her eyes, and said nothing. She paled. Grandpa looked at my father now, his expression shifting like a cloud shadowing a sunlit hill. "Richard," he said slowly, his voice deeper now, colder. "2 years ago, I gave you $400,000. I said, explicitly, that the house was for Lila, a gift, something her mother would have wanted. Are you telling me—" He didn't finish. He didn't need to. My father placed the glass down on the mantel and straightened his shirt. I thought it would be better if the family benefited from the space. Evan needed a good environment. Meredith has her migraines. Lila, she always seemed comfortable living on her own. "Comfortable?" I whispered. I stepped forward. "Do you know what it's like to boil pasta in a pot with a broken handle because you can't afford a new one? Do you know what it's like to wrap yourself in 3 blankets because the heater breaks down every other week?" I turned to Grandpa now. "You didn't just send money for a house. You sent me a future, and they took it." His face was stone. "Richard," he said again, "you stole from your own daughter's child, from my granddaughter." "I did what I thought was best," my father said, but his voice cracked. "Then you're a fool," Grandpa said, his voice now thunder, "and a thief." He looked around the room slowly, at the decor, the expensive furniture, the photos on the walls, Evan's trophies, their wedding portrait, a holiday shot with me in the corner, smiling like I belonged. "They staged all this," Grandpa muttered. "They sent me pictures, made me believe you lived here. I believed them. I thought—" He stopped. His shoulders rose with one deep, furious breath. "Meredith," he snapped, "you are not her mother. You never will be, and you will not speak to her again." Meredith's face crumpled. She tried to speak. Nothing came out. Grandpa turned to me. "Go get your things." "What?" "You're not staying here another second. You're coming with me. To Chicago. And this house? It will be returned to you." I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. It was too much. And yet, at the same time, it was everything I had ever wanted to hear. I nodded, picked up my scarf from my coat pocket, and placed it in Grandpa's hand. "I made this for you." He held it like it was a relic, something sacred. "I'll wear it every winter," he said softly. "Every single one." Behind us, Meredith sobbed. Evan said nothing. My father just stood there, hollow. For the first time, he looked small, not angry, not powerful, just small, like a man who knew he had lost something that couldn't be bought back. We left that house quietly. No more shouting, no more words, just the sound of my boots on the snowy steps and Grandpa's firm hand on my back as he guided me toward a new chapter, one not built on survival, but on reclamation. And as we drove away, I didn't look back. I didn't need to, because I knew what I was leaving behind. And more importantly, I knew what I was finally walking toward. The next morning, I woke up in a bedroom that didn't smell like dust or mildew. It smelled like fresh cotton, like warm wood and old books, like somewhere you were allowed to breathe. We were in Grandpa's condo on the edge of Chicago, high enough that the window framed a perfect view of the waking skyline. The light poured in through gauzy curtains, falling gently across the hardwood floor and the cozy guest bed where I lay, cocooned in silence and soft blankets. For a long moment, I didn't move, not because I was tired, but because I didn't know what to do with peace. I had lived in survival mode for so long that stillness felt like something foreign, suspicious. But then I heard the kettle whistle from the kitchen and Grandpa's voice humming some old tune off key, and it all became real again. I was here, and I wasn't going back. I got up, wrapped myself in the robe he'd left hanging on the closet door, and padded out into the hallway. The condo was simple but elegant. Wooden furniture, thick carpets, a fireplace framed by bookshelves, and windows that let in the world. He looked up as I entered, his reading glasses sliding down his nose. "Mornin', Lila. Toast's in the oven. Tea or coffee?" "Tea," I said, smiling a little. He nodded. "Chamomile. Thought you might need something to settle your nerves." He was right. My hands were steady, but inside, I was still reeling. It had all happened so fast. The confrontation, the walk out, the ride here, mostly silent except for Grandpa occasionally muttering, "I can't believe they did this." And then, safety. Now, as he poured me tea and set down a plate of buttered toast, he slid a thick manila envelope across the table. "What's this?" He leaned back. "Receipts." I raised an eyebrow. He gestured to the envelope. "I want you to see exactly what I gave them, what I told them, what they signed." I opened it slowly. Inside were printed emails, bank receipts, a signed agreement, notarized. It was all there, black and white. I scanned the document, my heart beating faster with every line. The agreement was simple. Grandpa had wired $400,000 to my father for the purchase of a property in my name as a memorial for my mother and an investment in my future. It wasn't vague. It wasn't suggestive. It was explicit. I was the intended owner, the only one. There was even a clause stating the funds were to be used solely for that purpose, and that if anything changed, they were to notify Grandpa in writing. I looked up, stunned. "They never told you they used it for themselves?" "Not a word," Grandpa said bitterly. "They sent pictures of the house, of you in the house. I thought you were happy. I thought they had finally done right by you." He ran a hand down his face. "I knew they treated you differently. But this is theft, Lila. Legal, maybe, but moral theft all the same." Tears burned behind my eyes, not because I was sad, but because I had been right all along. They never saw me as someone worth protecting, only as someone they could quietly erase while keeping the benefits of pretending I mattered. "I don't want revenge," I said quietly. "I just want to stop pretending." He nodded. "We'll do it right. No screaming, no chaos, just truth and consequences." I looked at him. "How?" He smiled faintly and reached for his phone. "I own the development firm that built that neighborhood, remember? Hollow Creek. It's one of my company's projects. That house was a builder's model before they moved in. I personally approved the release." I blinked. "Wait, so you—" "I have access to every title, deed, transaction, and ownership record tied to that lot," he said. "And we're going to pull every single one." My pulse quickened. "And then?" He gave me a long look, firm but kind. "Then we call a meeting." The invitation went out 2 days later, a simple message from Grandpa's assistant. "Mr. Will Foster requests your presence for a private family business meeting this Friday, 5:00 p.m. at the Foster and Ridgewell Executive Suite, 34th floor." That was it. No explanation, no apology, no hint of what was coming. I could only imagine how it landed in their inboxes, how Meredith's perfectly manicured fingers might have clenched over her phone screen, or how my father's eyes probably narrowed the second he read the words private family business meeting and executive suite. They weren't used to summons. They were used to power, to subtle control, quiet manipulation, words that could twist and bind without ever raising a voice. But now the ground was shifting beneath their feet, and this time they weren't the ones deciding who got a seat at the table. Friday arrived fast. Too fast. I stood in front of the full-length mirror in Grandpa's guest room, adjusting the collar of the navy blouse I'd borrowed from his assistant. Tailored, crisp, confident. I paired it with black slacks and a pair of modest heels. Simple, professional. I looked nothing like the girl who used to sit alone in the attic, tracing house plans on scrap paper with a flashlight. I looked like someone with something to say. When we arrived at the building, the front desk security greeted Grandpa like royalty. Elevators opened on cue. We rode in silence to the 34th floor, the air around us heavy with anticipation. The doors slid open to reveal a sleek boardroom with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the lake. The kind of place where million-dollar decisions were made. And there they were, already waiting. Meredith in cream silk, fingers wrapped tightly around her purse. My father in a gray blazer, pacing near the coffee bar like a man rehearsing a speech. Evan sat with his hands folded awkwardly, glancing nervously between them. The moment they saw me walk in beside Grandpa, everything in the room shifted. Meredith's smile flickered like a candle in the wind. My father's pacing stopped. Evan's eyes widened. I took a seat beside Grandpa at the head of the table, not at the side, not in the corner, right next to the man they had fooled for 2 years, the man who had come to reclaim what was his. No one spoke for a moment. Then Grandpa cleared his throat. "I appreciate you all being here." My father forced a chuckle. "Of course. What's this about, Dad? Something going on with the company?" Grandpa didn't smile. "I brought you here because of Lila, and because of what you did with the house." Silence. Cold. Absolute. "I gave you money," Grandpa continued. "A specific amount, for a specific purpose. That purpose was to purchase a home for Lila in her name, a memorial for Elise, an act of love." His voice didn't waver. "You took that money, bought a home, put it in your name, never told Lila, never involved her, and for 2 years you lied to me, sent me pictures, manufactured stories, staged gatherings, all to make me believe she was living in the house I gifted her." He slid a folder across the table. Deed records, banking transactions, the wire, your email replies, the notarized agreement with your signature. Shall I continue? My father opened the folder with trembling hands. I didn't mean to—" "You didn't mean to steal from your own daughter?" Grandpa said, his tone sharpening. "Because that's what this is. Theft. You didn't just rob her of a house, you robbed her of safety, of stability, of the one thing her mother would have wanted her to have." Meredith's voice, sweet and acidic, broke in. "Now, Will, let's not turn this into something dramatic. Lila never asked for the house. She always wanted her independence." I turned to her, calm, direct. "Because I was never offered anything else. You kept me in the attic while Evan had everything. You left me out of your lives unless Grandpa visited. You didn't give me independence. You gave me exile." She flinched. I wasn't yelling. That made it worse. My words landed with precision, clear, undeniable. "I've worked since I was 16, I continued. Paid my own rent, bought secondhand food, skipped meals to afford art supplies, while you took photos of me in a house I had never even seen the inside of." Evan finally spoke. "I didn't know." I looked at him. You didn't want to. Grandpa stood. "This meeting isn't to argue," he said. "It's to inform." He turned to Meredith and my father. "I've already spoken to legal counsel. The property will be returned to its intended owner. A formal title transfer is being processed this week." My father's jaw dropped. "You can't just—" "I can," Grandpa said, cutting him off. "Because I paid for it. And because your agreement gives me the right to reclaim funds if the terms are breached, which they were. You will vacate within 30 days. Lila will take full possession." He glanced toward the assistant in the corner. "There will be no public scandal, no press, no lawsuits. But if you resist, I will have no choice but to escalate." My father stood now, shoulders stiff, voice rising. "You're ruining everything. For her, after all we've done for—" "You've done nothing for her," Grandpa said, "and I won't let you steal one more thing." He turned to me. "Lila, this house, your mother would have wanted you to have it. You deserve to have it, and you deserve to decide who's welcome in it." I swallowed the lump in my throat. The room was dead quiet again. No one argued, no one denied it, because the truth had finally been spoken, not behind closed doors, not whispered in shame, but at the table where they had once ruled. Now it was mine. After the meeting, they scattered like broken glass. My father mumbled something about needing time. Meredith stormed out of the conference room without saying a word to either of us, her heels clicking like gunshots against the marble floor. Evan looked dazed, like the spell had been broken, but the world around him hadn't caught up yet. And me? I just stood still. My body felt strangely light, like I had left something behind in that room. Not just pain or fear, but the weight of silence. Years of being quiet, years of shrinking myself to fit into corners no one cared to look at. I wasn't in the corner anymore. I was at the head of the table. That night, back at the condo, I sat by the fire with Grandpa. No television, no music, just the hush of city traffic far below and the soft crackle of flames. "I never wanted it to be like this," I said finally. He glanced over. "Like what?" "A fight, a public humiliation. I didn't want to see him fall apart." Grandpa stirred his tea. "You didn't make him fall, Lila. He built that collapse brick by brick, year by year. You just stopped holding it up for him." I stared into the fire. "It still hurts." "Of course it does," he said gently. "It always hurts when the people who were supposed to love you force you to survive them." I didn't respond. There was nothing to say. Only the truth, sitting between us like a third person. He reached over and placed a small box in my lap. "What's this?" "Open it." Inside was the bronze key he gave me when I was 12, the one he'd said wouldn't open any door, yet. I blinked, confused. I thought I lost this. "You did," he smiled. "You left it on the porch the summer Meredith refused to let you go to camp. I kept it." I picked it up. It was warm from the firelight, familiar. "Now," Grandpa said, "it opens something real." He slid a deed across the coffee table. I recognized the address immediately, Hollow Creek Drive. My name was on the line marked Owner, in block letters, unmistakable. I pressed a hand over my mouth, unable to speak. He nodded toward it. "You don't have to move in right away. You don't even have to live there at all if you don't want. Sell it, rent it, tear it down and rebuild it from scratch. Whatever you want." "It's not about the house," I whispered. "It's about finally having a choice." Exactly. That was the difference. For the first time in my life, I wasn't being handed scraps. I wasn't being told what to accept. I was being offered freedom. And with that freedom came the collapse of everything they had carefully built. Because once I stepped into that house, my house, under my name, the illusion fell apart for everyone else. The neighborhood noticed first. The neighbors who had believed Meredith's holiday card lies about how I had moved away for grad school, about how the house was a gift to the whole family, they started asking questions, and word got out. Quietly, organically, but unmistakably. Meredith's book club disbanded. My father's business partners began pulling away. Even Evan's college application counselor, who had once come to the house for mock interviews, now hesitated to use their address for recommendations. It wasn't scandal in the tabloids. It was shame in the fabric of their lives, the silent, suffocating kind. I didn't rub it in. I didn't gloat. I didn't even call. I just lived. I returned to my apartment one last time and packed my few belongings. Some clothes, books, that old sketch pad from high school, my store-bought microwave, a chair I'd gotten off Craigslist, and then I walked into my house. Alone, no fanfare, no photos, no announcement. I stepped inside and stood still in the foyer, just breathing. The walls were quiet now. The hallway clean. No one else's perfume lingering in the air. No footsteps above me. No orders barked from downstairs. Just peace. I moved slowly from room to room, running my fingers over surfaces, memorizing the space. And when I got to the attic, I paused. I hadn't planned to go up, but I did. The stairs creaked, as if in memory of every time I'd climbed something narrow and dark and uninviting. At the top was an empty guest room. No peeling paint, no draft, no mildew mattress. Just a small space with clean walls and a single window overlooking the backyard. I stood in the center, arms crossed. Then I laughed. Out loud. Not because it was funny, but because it was surreal. I had been banished to an attic all my life, and now here I was, owning the house that once cast me out. The irony wasn't lost on me, neither was the justice. Spring arrived quietly, and with it came the 30-day mark, exactly 1 month since the meeting. Exactly 1 month since the masks fell. The house was mine now, not just on paper, but in presence. My name was on every letter, every document, every tax notice. The locks had been changed, the garage had been emptied. The old family photos were gone, boxed and returned to Meredith and Richard without a word. And through all of it, I never raised my voice. Not once. I didn't write a post on social media. I didn't broadcast my victory. I didn't gloat in their downfall. Instead, I moved in quietly, day by day, hour by hour, unfolding my life into rooms that had never belonged to me, but now wrapped around me like safety. It was subtle, but it was complete. Grandpa visited on weekends. Sometimes he'd bring fresh pastries from a nearby bakery. Other times, just coffee and conversation. He never brought up my father again, not unless I asked, and most of the time I didn't, because the silence I kept now wasn't one of fear. It was one of freedom, and freedom doesn't always need to scream. Sometimes it only needs to exist. But the old world still tried to intrude, just once, and it was enough to remind me that silence could still speak louder than vengeance. It happened on a warm Sunday morning. I was out back in the garden, digging into a patch of dirt behind the kitchen. I'd always wanted to plant herbs, basil, rosemary, lavender maybe, something that would grow with me, something living, rooted, lasting. That's when I heard a car pull up. I wiped my hands on a towel and stepped around to the front, expecting the mail carrier or maybe Grandpa coming by early. But it wasn't him. It was them. My father and Meredith, standing on the sidewalk, not on the porch, not on the lawn, like they knew they weren't welcome. Meredith wore sunglasses too large for her face. My father looked thinner, smaller. He held a manila envelope in his hand. Something about it felt formal. I said nothing at first, just stood there, arms folded, waiting. He cleared his throat. "We didn't come to fight." I tilted my head. "Didn't expect you to," I said. He took a step forward, then thought better of it. "I came to apologize." I didn't move. He continued. "I didn't realize how much we hurt you. I see it now." "Do you? Do you see the attic? Do you see the birthdays missed? Do you see the years of pretending I didn't exist unless it suited you?" But I didn't say that, because I didn't need to. I just watched him squirm. "I was trying to hold the family together," he said, "trying to do what I thought was right. I see now. I failed." Meredith looked like she wanted to vanish into the pavement. He handed the envelope to me. I didn't take it. He set it gently on the porch railing. "It's the last of the documents," he said. "A signed letter from both of us, acknowledging the transfer and your rightful ownership. I know the lawyers have it, but I wanted to put it in your hands too." Still, I said nothing. He hesitated. "We'll stay away. Unless you—" "No." Just that. One word. Final. Sharp. And all mine. He nodded, eyes falling. They turned and walked back to the car. No raised voices. No tears. Just two people walking away from a place they had tried to steal, and a daughter they had failed to claim. And me? I didn't cry, didn't flinch. I picked up the envelope, brought it inside, and filed it with the others. Then I went back to the garden. I planted rosemary first, then lavender, then basil. I pressed the seeds into the dirt with steady fingers, watered them, whispered over them. Not prayers, not hope, but intention, that this would grow, that I would grow. And the world would watch, not with pity, not with fanfare, but with quiet awe. Because I didn't win by shouting. I didn't win by begging. I didn't win by proving I was good enough. I won by walking away and building something better in silence. There's a peculiar kind of silence that settles in after a storm. It's not the kind that lingers with dread, waiting for another wave to crash. It's the stillness that tells you, it's over. And for the first time in my life, silence didn't scare me. After the last confrontation on the front porch, they didn't come back. No messages, no letters, no phone calls. Not from my father, not from Meredith, not from Evan. They disappeared as quietly as they'd ruled my life, with veiled smiles, half-truths, and calculated distance. And honestly, that was mercy. Because what would they say anyway? What words could undo years of absence? What apology could patch over the attic, the fake family dinners, the stolen home? I wasn't interested in explanations anymore. I was interested in peace. And peace, it turns out, doesn't beg for closure. It builds its own. The neighborhood adjusted quickly. At first, there were sideways glances, cautious nods. People who had once gossiped with Meredith now smiled politely at me across the hedges, unsure of where they stood. Some tried to chat. "Lila, right? I didn't realize you were, well, you know, the actual owner of the house." I just smiled, didn't correct them, didn't explain. Because I didn't owe this street a story. I owed myself healing, and healing doesn't come with a megaphone. It comes slowly, like watering dry soil, like repainting walls that once held echoes of neglect. I started small, rearranged the furniture, removed the stiff, expensive couch from the living room, and replaced it with something soft, something I chose. I filled the walls with prints I'd collected from local artists, framed my own sketches, left space for light, for air, for joy. I turned the attic into an art studio, painted the walls warm gold, added a large drafting table, installed a skylight with Grandpa's help. He loved it. "You've turned it into something sacred," he said, sipping tea while watching the light dance across my blueprints. And I had. Because that attic, the place I once associated with rejection, was now a testament to reclamation, to rising. It became the room where I dreamed loudest, where I laughed freely, where I sketched without fear of someone tearing the pages. One afternoon, while organizing old files, I found a photo I hadn't seen in years. It was tucked into the back of a notebook, a picture of me and my mother. I was just a baby, wrapped in her arms, and she was laughing, not posing, not performing, laughing. I traced the edge of the photo and whispered, "You'd be proud of me, wouldn't you?" And I could almost hear her answer, "You already know I am." That night, I cooked dinner for myself, set the table for one, lit a candle, not because anyone was watching, but because I deserved softness. I sat in the quiet, no voices interrupting, no footsteps above, no fear of being told to clean up after yourself or hurry and get out of the way. Just me. And the home I built from the ashes of the one they tried to bury me in. Their silence wasn't loud. It didn't crash into me like a wave. It seeped in, like cold air through a barely sealed window. At first, I didn't notice it. I had grown so used to being outside the family circle that not hearing from them felt almost familiar, comfortable even. But slowly, little things crept in. Questions, memories, and that old ache of why. Why wasn't I ever enough? Why didn't they love me the way they were supposed to? Why did I have to earn what was always freely given to Evan? And what haunted me more than anything was this. Did they even notice I was gone? Or had I been so invisible for so long that my absence just made the house more spacious? I didn't expect reconciliation. I didn't want it, not in the way people think of healing. I didn't need a perfect ending with hugs and weepy apologies. But I wanted acknowledgement, something, some sliver of remorse. Instead, what I got were whispers, through mutual acquaintances, vague texts from numbers I didn't recognize. "Hey, Lila, just heard about what happened. That's intense. Are you okay? Your dad looked rough at the Chamber of Commerce mixer. I ran into Meredith at the club. She didn't mention you, but she seemed off." None of it mattered, but all of it lingered. And it made me realize that even though they were gone from my life, the version of me they had built still lingered in other people's minds. The helper, the quiet one, the girl who was always a little less shiny than her brother. It frustrated me, because I had changed. I wasn't hiding anymore. I wasn't waiting for someone to invite me into a story they never wrote for me in the first place. But the echo of their absence, it still rattled around in my bones. One night, I dreamed I was back in the attic, only this time the door was locked from the outside, and I couldn't scream. I just stood there, holding a drawing I had made, watching it burn in my hands, while voices downstairs laughed and toasted with wine. I woke up gasping, sweaty, shaking. It was a dream, but the grief was real. Because what no one tells you is that sometimes healing hurts worse than the wound, especially when you're doing it alone. That morning, I walked into the studio and opened all the windows, let the air in, let the pain out, and I picked up a pencil. I didn't sketch a house, not a tree house, not a skyscraper, not a dream project. I drew myself. as I remembered me, age 9, in that attic, with tangled hair and big eyes and a sketchbook too heavy for my knees. And then I drew her climbing down the stairs, opening the door, walking away, not running, not screaming, just walking, calm, steady, with her chin held high. When I finished, I stared at the page for a long time. Then I framed it, hung it right above the attic doorway. That drawing was my declaration. That girl, forgotten, folded, cast aside, had survived. She had become me, and I was not invisible anymore. Later that week, I received a small envelope in the mail. No return address, no note, just a card. Inside was a folded photo, a recent one, Evan, standing outside what looked like a college dorm, alone. No Meredith, no Richard, just him, with 2 suitcases and a duffel bag. On the back of the photo, scrawled in blue ink, were 3 words, "I finally see." That was it. No explanation, no apology. But it was something. Not enough to undo everything. Not even close. But it was a spark, and I didn't hate him, because Evan was never the villain. He was just the chosen one in a system that needed someone to shine, and someone to disappear. I was the latter, until I decided not to be. I placed the photo in a drawer, not out of bitterness, out of peace, because not every ending needs to be a reunion. Sometimes the final chapter is written in quiet acknowledgments, small gestures, new boundaries, and doors that finally close. Some people say you can't start over in the same place where you were broken. They say the air holds memory, that the walls whisper old wounds back to life. But I've learned something else. You don't start over in the same place. You make the place start over with you. And that's what I did. Room by room, I rewrote the story this house had told. I didn't just move furniture. I moved meaning. The kitchen where Meredith used to scold me for using too many dishes became the place I invited friends for warm meals, big laughter, and spontaneous baking at midnight. The dining room, once a museum of tension and cold silences, became a creative co-working space on Saturdays, filled with sketch pads, laptops, and soft jazz humming from the speakers. I replaced their portraits on the walls with art, mine and others, prints from artists I met at weekend markets, a framed quote from Maya Angelou, a watercolor of a bird mid-flight, almost identical to the one Grandpa carved for me when I was a child. And the guest room? That became Grandpa's room. He came often, stayed overnight when his knees ached, or when the Chicago winter felt a little too sharp. We'd eat soup by the fire, watch old black and white movies, and trade stories like poker chips. "I've never seen this place glow the way it does now," he told me once, taking a sip of tea. "It's like you exhaled something sacred into these walls." I smiled. "It's the first time this house has ever felt like home." He nodded. "Because now it has you in it." But home wasn't the only thing I rebuilt. I went back to school. Not full-time at first, just one online class, then another. It was scary, expensive, exhausting. But I remembered who I was, the girl who once dreamed of becoming an architect, the girl who built cities in her mind while folding laundry, the girl who studied blueprints under a blanket with a flashlight while everyone else slept. That girl deserved her chance. So I gave it to her. Eventually, I enrolled in a community college design program. I showed up to orientation in thrifted slacks and second-hand boots, clutching a worn notebook and a pencil case stitched by hand. But I held my head high, because I wasn't just studying design, I was living it, designing a life, a future, a version of myself untouched by their cruelty. My professors noticed me quickly, my hunger, my eye, my hours spent after class refining a draft until it was sharp enough to cut glass. They didn't know my story. They didn't need to. My work spoke loud enough, and slowly opportunities opened. A mentor, an internship, a chance to help design a youth center for under-resourced communities. That one meant everything, because it gave me the one thing I had needed all along: purpose. I remembered what it was like to feel invisible, to grow up in someone else's house and learn how to survive without leaving fingerprints on anything. I knew what it meant to crave your own space, your own name on a deed, your own table, your own light. So I designed that center with everything I never had: a skylight in every room, soundproof nooks for kids who needed quiet, a library of donated books, blank walls where kids could hang their art. When it opened, I stood in the corner of the main room, watching the first group of students walk through the doors. One girl, maybe 8 or 9, pointed to a corner reading bench and said, "I want to sit there. It feels safe." I had to excuse myself to the hallway to wipe the tears from my eyes, because that was the legacy I wanted. Not revenge, not power, not even acknowledgement, just transformation, turning pain into shelter, turning silence into space, turning survival into vision. And that's what I built. After the fire, not a comeback, not a spectacle, just a life that glowed quietly in the places they once tried to darken. Every night when I turned out the lights, I'd pass the old attic doorway, and every night I'd touch the drawing of my younger self, framed, bold, walking down those stairs, and I'd whisper to her with all the tenderness in the world, "You made it." One Saturday morning in early summer, I stood barefoot on the back porch, a mug of coffee warming my hands as the sun slipped gently over the rooftops. The lavender I planted months ago had begun to bloom, soft purple tufts that perfumed the yard with calm. The air was cool, the birds were loud, and my heart was still, not numb, not guarded, just steady, at peace. I had expected the wounds of my past to linger longer, to ache each time I passed familiar corners of the house or caught my reflection in the hallway mirror that once belonged to Meredith. But healing had done its work, quietly, like ivy, like light under a locked door. Some scars still lived inside me, but they no longer dictated the rhythm of my day. I was free. Later that afternoon, my house filled with laughter, real laughter, not the brittle, polite kind we used to perform when Grandpa visited, but the loud, reckless, belly-deep kind that leaves you breathless and grateful at the same time. My friend group, mostly classmates from the design program and a few kindred spirits I met at the local art co-op, had come over for dinner. Everyone brought something: a casserole, a loaf of bread, a bottle of wine, a playlist, a story. It wasn't a party, it was a gathering, and it reminded me of everything I once thought I would never have. Chosen family, people who saw me, not for what I had survived, but for what I had become. One of them, a soft-spoken illustrator named Kemi, wandered into the studio while I was checking on the garlic bread. When I came up behind her, she was standing under the attic skylight, eyes fixed on the framed drawing of young me walking out of the attic. She didn't say anything for a moment. Then she whispered, "Is that you?" I nodded. She turned to me. "That's the bravest thing I've ever seen." I didn't know what to say, so I just smiled. Because she was right, but not in the way she thought. The bravest thing I'd ever done wasn't surviving that house. It was choosing to live fully after it. to not let it define me, to build something in spite of it. That night, after everyone left and the dishes were done, I sat in the garden with Grandpa under string lights we had hung between the fence posts. He took a slow sip of cider and looked around. "You know," he said, "this place was always beautiful." I raised an eyebrow. "Even when it was Meredith's?" He chuckled. "Even then, but back then, it was like a photograph, still and perfect and cold." He looked at me. "You made it real." We sat in silence for a while. The stars peeked through the darkening sky. The lavender rustled in the breeze, and somewhere down the block, a wind chime sang softly. Then Grandpa leaned forward and said something I'll never forget. "You know, your mom would have loved this house." I didn't speak. "I can almost hear her," he continued, "dancing barefoot in that living room, baking scones and forgetting to set timers, singing while rearranging the furniture every other week." A lump rose in my throat. "She would have loved who you've become," he said, "not because of your success, but because you never let the fire burn the good out of you." Tears welled in my eyes, but I didn't let them fall. I just reached out and took his hand. Because no matter how strong I had become, a part of me would always be the girl who needed someone to say, "You mattered, you always did," and now someone had. The seasons changed again. Lavender faded, leaves reddened, crisped, fell. Chicago turned colder, but my home stayed warm. Not just because of heaters and blankets, but because it finally had a soul. I'd built more than comfort here. I had built presence. I had built proof that a house doesn't become a home by inheritance. It becomes one when you breathe life into its walls, when you allow it to witness your healing, your tears, your joy, your choosing. And I had chosen. My career began to blossom. The Youth Center project earned recognition. A local magazine ran a story on the space and called it an oasis for unseen children. I was invited to speak on a panel about equitable design. Someone asked if I had always been this confident. I laughed, told them confidence wasn't born in me. It was reclaimed. One quiet step at a time. The day I received my official architecture license, I came home late, tired but euphoric. I opened a bottle of cheap champagne, sat cross-legged on the living room floor, and whispered into the stillness, "We did it, little Lila." And I meant it, because even though my name was on the certificate, so was hers. The version of me they left in the attic, the one who didn't get birthday candles, the one who was told dreams were for other people. She had made it here with me, and I would never forget her again. A few days later, a letter arrived. Not from my father, not from Meredith, from Evan, handwritten, on lined paper, folded carefully, sealed with nervous hands. It wasn't long, just a few lines. "Lila, I don't expect forgiveness. I wouldn't even ask for it, but I want you to know I see now. All of it. I remember you staying quiet, letting me have space. I remember the birthdays, the dinners, the way you faded just to keep the peace. I didn't understand then. I do now. And I'm sorry, not for what they did, but for what I didn't do." I read it 3 times, set it down, let it sit on the table for a full week before I responded. When I finally wrote back, I didn't write much either, just this: "Thank you for seeing me. That's all I ever wanted." I didn't mail it. I didn't have to. Some acknowledgments live better in the heart than in the mailbox, and I didn't need Evan's friendship. I didn't need to rebuild anything with him. But I needed to know he had looked inward, that the light had finally reached the places he had kept shut. And with that, something in me unclenched. The last thread snapped, and I was free, not just from the past, but from the desire to rewrite it, from the craving to be understood by the very people who once refused to hear me. I stopped chasing, stopped proving, stopped waiting, and started living, fully, fiercely, quietly. The day Grandpa passed, it rained. Not hard, just a steady, soft drizzle that felt more like a lullaby than grief. He went peacefully, in his sleep, holding the scarf I'd knitted for him long ago, the one he wore every winter, even when it didn't match his coat. I stood by his bedside that morning, heartbreaking and full all at once, because while the world lost a giant, I had been given his final gift. Not money, not property, but belief. He believed in me when no one else did, and that belief had lit a fuse inside me that burned brighter than any anger I had ever known. I spoke at his memorial, not as the estranged granddaughter, not as the forgotten one, but as the woman he had helped build. I spoke of his hands, the way they held wood and nails and promises, the way they reached for me without question again and again. I spoke of how he had helped me take back what was mine, not just a house, but a voice. And when I finished, I looked out at the small crowd and said, I used to think I was the extra piece in everyone's puzzle, the mistake, the burden, the afterthought. But Grandpa taught me I was never meant to fit their frame. I was meant to build my own. That night, I came home, lit a candle in the kitchen, left it burning beside the framed photo of him and me standing on the porch last Christmas, our last one together, and I whispered into the quiet, "Thank you." Years later, I still live in that house. It doesn't feel like their house anymore. It's mine, fully. The walls remember me now, the good me, the growing me, the woman who once hid behind the curtain of someone else's life and now opens her own windows to the sun. There are more plants now, more books, more music. Sometimes I host design students for mentorship over tea and lemon cake. Sometimes I just sit by the window with a pen and draw what peace looks like. And sometimes, when the moon is high and the air is soft, I walk up the stairs to the attic studio and press my palm against the wall. Just once, just to remind it and myself that this is no longer a place of exile. This is where my life bloomed, where the forgotten girl became the woman who came home. Not to beg, not to explain, but to own. And when I close my eyes at night, I don't see the attic anymore. I see sky. I see light. I see a door swinging open and a girl walking through, with no need to look back. If you've ever been made to feel like you didn't belong, if you've ever been the one they overlooked, dismissed, or pushed to the side, I want you to know your story isn't over. It's just waiting for your voice to rise. So if this story stirred something in you, hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and share this video with someone who needs to remember they are not baggage, they are not forgotten, they are the beginning of something beautiful, and their time is coming, just like mine did.